This is the shore, and the waves keep crushing in.
Welcome to the International War Veteran Podcast Blood Diamonds and Gold. Today on the show, Robin Horsfall, Falkland War veteran, bodyguard and karate champion, now poet and book author. He was deployed in Northern Ireland in the 80s, so we talk about walls and conflict and live life from Berlin, a city that had a wall too. Welcome to the show. Mr. Horsfall, did you celebrate the Gay Pride in Prague this year?
This year there hasn't been a parade, I don't think. A few years back, I went with my son and his partner, and we had a great day out. But COVID, stopped it really. So it's usually a big day in Prague, and it's a great day out. Yeah.
How's life in Prague? There's lots of expats, no?
They're an integral part of the community, I think. But it's a tourist city, really. So since COVID, it's been very empty and quiet, which is good for the residents in the sense of you want to enjoy the city and the river and the facilities. You know, you can see everything without crowds of people, but it's not good for the...
You did study literature. You went back to university very late in your life. How did it feel being educated again?
Well, I went to university because I'd broken my neck, and I needed to have something to take my mind off the recovery process while that was happening. And so going to university gave me an opportunity, also helped me become a better writer. So I did English literature with creative writing for 3 years. And that was an experience because I was a mature student in a class of 21-year-old women and 2 or 3 young men as well, but mostly women. So it was an interesting experience in a faculty that was dominated by radical feminists. So, yeah, and they tended to form opinions of who and what I was without getting to know me. So it took some time, but I enjoyed it. I learned a great deal. Yeah.
About education as well?
Well, I learned a lot about literature. I learned a lot about the requirements for higher education in terms of the Harvard method and referencing and how to put essays together in order to pass exams and so on. But I learned a lot about vocabulary, and the thing I enjoyed most, I think, when I took away from it was forms of poetry. I really enjoyed learning about poetry. Studies I had improved my writing dramatically in terms of structuring books and putting things together and editing, formulating good work. But it was the poetry that really I carried away with some sense of purpose.
Did you read? Do you read a lot of poetry or fiction of other veterans?
I read a lot of the war poets, as well as Shakespeare as well, which is all poetry. You know, Shakespearean writings are all plays; they're all poetic. So sonnets of Walter Raleigh, all the way through to the war poets like Sassoon and Brooke and people like that. So the First World War poets, and some more recent, but although people love poetry and they use it an awful lot of the time and they quote it and they enjoy it when they hear it, very few people ever get to put it into a book.
Is rap music like war poetry?
Yeah, it's a form of poetry. It has its own form, its own style, its own rhythm. I know, I can see how it works. I don't like it much, but that's just a matter of taste. It's still a form of poetry. I mean, poems are songs without music most of the time.
Did your schoolmates, did they all have a plan what they want to study?
I don't know.
In what job they want to work?
No, I don't think so. I think in my time, which would have been the 60s and 70s, kids went to school and they left school and got a job, or they went on to university, and then they decided what they wanted to do when they finished their education, not while they were still doing it. I mean, people change as they grow up. They form different tastes. They discover different skills. So what on earth would you try to say to somebody who's 12 years old? What do you want to be? Okay, you want to be a doctor, then this is what you need to do. I wanted to be a nuclear physicist when I was 14. And by the time I was 15, I was in the British Army. So
it would be better to have more education and tell kids, if they don't get that from home, that they could become hedge fund manager or something about money earning, that there's other systems than.
The most important thing about education is to try and get a general knowledge of most things by the time you're 16, and then choose to do some of the things that you are best at or want to achieve at until you're 18, and then go on, if you want to, university. But academia isn't the only successful path in life. Some people leave school at a very young age and discover that they are very good at making money or making something or selling something. And so they go on to be captains of industry. Alan Sugar's one example. He started off as a barrow boy in London. He didn't go to university. He's one of the most respected captains of industry today. So people should become educated and then find what they enjoy and what they're good at, and work hard at that. Because if you enjoy what you're doing, you will be successful at it because you enjoy it.
When you went to in 1982 in Oman, there was a literacy. I think more than 90% of the people couldn't read or write. How was it? What did you do?
I don't know. I mean, it wasn't an issue that I came across. I ran a medical program there out in the desert. So reading or writing, even if they could read and write, they would have been reading and writing Arabic. So it wouldn't have been something that I had anything to do with. I was interested in people's medical health and discovering what was going on with the Bedou out in the desert, and had some great successes with it as well. But reading and writing, I don't know.
How come you got to go there anyhow?
I was a soldier. I was in the SAS, and I was a paramedic, and so I was given the task of running a medical program over a very large desert area, and going out, meeting the local people, sometimes in extremely small groups of 2 or 3 families living in tents in the desert with camels and a Toyota Land Cruiser usually, and visiting them, seeing what their health was like. And I discovered that children were dying in one particular area, and took blood samples back and tested them, and then took a doctor out, and we discovered the children were dying of measles. So we brought in an inoculation team from Muscat in the north, and saved an awful lot of people's lives. So that's something I'm extraordinarily proud of. That's the sort of soldiering that the media and newspapers and extremists don't realize goes on.
How do you think the soldier gets viewed? What's the perception? What's your perception on society on the soldier of the UK?
Well,
maybe?
The media in general tend to use the word innocent civilians, which implies that in some way that soldiers are some way guilty. But soldiers carry out the political process on behalf of their government. So it's politicians that start wars, it's politicians that send soldiers to war, and then it's soldiers that have to fight and die in wars. And when soldiers are volunteers, that's what they choose to do, and that's the job they're given. But after the war is over, then the politicians want to say, oh, they didn't fight it nicely enough for us. And they've been very bad boys for killing the enemy and getting it wrong, making mistakes. And so I have a very poor opinion of that kind of attitude from people that have never been there, never done it, never experienced it, but want to sit in judgment of it, having sent somebody to do the job for them. There's a big failure in Western governments now to appreciate the extraordinarily difficult job that young men and women have to do on behalf of their governments.
Do you think in Czech Republic it's in the USA they're all cheerleading? From what I see a lot, they have more cheerleading, cheering up the troops.
Yeah, I know what you mean. The American way of doing things is to enhance and exaggerate and make it big and appreciate the people that do good things. And when they put somebody high up on a pedestal, they try to keep them there. I mean, in the Czech Republic, they have a lot of memorials to remember their heroes from the past. The people who assassinated Heydrich, they're memorized every year. There's a memorial and a brass plaque on the floor. The heroes that the guy that self-immolated and burned himself alive on Václav Square, there's a memorial there to them with flowers laid on it regularly. People who were murdered by the Russians during the invasion of 1968, there are memorials to them all over the city that are maintained, and the children are reminded of them. So the heroes of this country are held in high value still. The British at the moment are failing in that respect, in the sense that they're trying to rewrite the past and bring modern sensibilities into what people did during history, and then feeling that somebody should apologize for what Napoleon did or Wellington did at Waterloo to the French or something crazy like that, or apologize because people carried out certain acts in the past that would today be considered evil and racist or evil and murder or evil and genocide. But that was the way the world was 200 years ago. And, it's strange. And every time somebody gets an honor in the United Kingdom, the press are trying to knock them off the pedestal and say, oh, yes, but did you know that, he did this in 1972, or he did this, or he said, I mean, you see it now, where people are getting removed from their employment in the United Kingdom because somebody found that they put a text on social media or a post on social media when they were 16 years old, 20 years ago. It's absolute insanity. As I get older, the world seems absolutely more and more crazy. It really does. More and more ridiculous. And sometimes you think that perhaps we need another great catastrophe to bring people back to actually understanding what's important in life, instead of creating all these dramas about things that don't really make a huge difference to people's lives.
So you were also you were bodyguard of Sheik Mohammed and the Dodi family. How was that?
Yes, it was well paid. It was boring. I was with Mohammed Alfajet for a year or so, and he's a good guy. Treated me very well, paid me well, but I got bored, so I moved on. A few years later, I was the bodyguard to a Ghanaian diplomat called John Akable Meza, who was an international crook, and we got deported. He got deported from Switzerland along with his bodyguards for trying to trick money out of banks. So that was another story. And he never paid us at the end because he was a crook. Eventually I ended up being the bodyguard for Rafiq Hariri, and Rafiq Hariri was planned to become the Prime Minister of Lebanon, which he did. and I was with him for a couple of years, and that was the highest possible level in private work that you could ever get, because there was a genuine threat in the Middle East, in Beirut. There was a war on, people wanting to kill him from certain sides, and we were traveling all around the world, visiting everywhere in private jets. And but your biggest enemy in that kind of work is complacency. You know, you have to make sure that nothing happens. That's your main task in life as a bodyguard. You deter things, you detect them, and if you have to react to them, it's because you didn't do the first two things properly. So you make sure nothing happens, and you've done a good job. If you make sure nothing happens, then your employers usually think they don't need you. So you do your job so well that they don't think they need you, and then something happens. And with Hariri, after I left, and not because I left, he got murdered by the Syrian Secret Service and blown up with a suicide bomb in Beirut. Yeah, very sad loss.
But you got hired now 3 times from people with a bad reputation, really. I mean, Sheik Mohammed apparently kidnapped his daughter, and Dodi is the enemy of the Queen. And
no, I don't think that's right in any case. I worked for Sheik Maktoum in 1985, I think, or 86, maybe later. And I was just looking after his property down in Ascot near Surrey for a few months. So I didn't know him. I wasn't close to him. I was just looking after his property, really, and his wife. So anything that happened with his daughter happened years after that. But as far as Dodi was concerned, I mean, I was Dodi's bodyguard in London for a while. But there's a classic example there of cutting down the standard and the money spent on the close protection team. At the beginning, it was all ex-Special Air Service bodyguard trained people, and then nothing happened. So then they got a cheaper version and a cheaper version and a cheaper version. And it's not to ridicule the people that were with him on the day he died, but it was a terrible accident caused by circumstances, but predominantly caused by the paparazzi, caused by the press, hounding people, chasing them, and feeling that they have the right to be in everybody's face who's in the public domain every minute of the day. And I still think that happens. I still think it's wicked. And I think that the paparazzi were directly responsible for the death of Dodi and Princess Diana, without any doubt at all. They caused it.
okay. Yeah. But you never met, did you ever meet Princess Diana?
Yeah, several times. When I was in the SAS, I met her several times. And she'd come to Hereford with Prince Charles and visit to see us work and see how we trained and enjoy her day with us. And yeah, she was very young then, very beautiful, and a lovely person.
So let's talk about Palestine, and because I've got a question about your time in Northern Ireland. There are a lot of money involved in the Northern Ireland conflict, that goes about drug dealing and weapons.
Well, Sinn Féin is the political arm of the Irish Republican Army, the terrorist group, and they are essentially an organised crime organisation. So they tend to control the bookmakers, the vice, prostitution, drugs throughout the whole island of Ireland, including the south, the Republic, as well as in the north. They've managed to use vast sums of money to manipulate the law, to push people in to positions of authority and power, and to corrupt the legal process in Northern Ireland. And that's leading now to soldiers being rearrested after 50 years for actions that took place in defense of the public up to 50 years ago. So there's a huge amount of corruption in Northern Ireland at the moment, and it is heavily funded by different sources, but it's essentially coming in from criminal sources. And they're very, very clever. They are using that money to claim that they're working on behalf of human rights, but they're not. They're working on behalf of a criminal organization that is trying to create a situation where the north of Ireland unites with the south of Ireland. It becomes one nation. But there's more to it than that as well. It's a huge money-making and power brokering process as well.
Yeah, I heard it's now about sausages.
Sausages?
Yeah, it's forbidden to sell British sausages to Northern Ireland. That I read that up in the yeah. I read that up in the Guardian yesterday.
Oh, well, then it's in the Guardian. It must be true. I don't believe anything I read in national media anymore, because who can you trust? If you read the Guardian, they say the opposite to the Daily Express. Every single day, the two newspapers are both extreme, one way and the other, left and right, and they both exaggerate and tell lies. So where do you find the truth these days? It's impossible to find it on television. It's impossible to find it in the media, because nobody is holding the centre ground and being objective anymore. The BBC has swung so far to the left that nobody actually believes what they say anymore. And then you've got the opposite side of it, which is the new GB channel, which is going to take a right-wing view. But there's no moral, moderate majority anymore. No people in the middle who are saying, this is ridiculous. Let's all get here together and do the right thing for everybody. No, it's all outrage. It's all accusations. It's all suggestions, or accusations with a question mark behind it, so that people who write the rubbish can claim they were only asking a question, but then they answer their own questions. They say things such as, oh, people want to know. You say, what people? And they don't know what people, because they're the people that are creating the question in the first place. I mean, America's the classic example of it. They created such a bipartisan situation in their own country that they're destroying their own empire. It's a mad world.
What do you read?
What do I read?
Yeah, what newspaper? Or what do you read?
I read lots and lots of different things. I read lots and lots of political pieces by very clever people. Noah Hariri, I like. Who's it? There's so many different authors that I've been reading lately, and at the moment, off the top of my head, it's hard to name them. Murray. Who else? I'm reading The Rise and Fall of Communism at the moment, which is fascinating because it's a big part of my early life. I lived through what went on in the early 60s, the invasion of Czechoslovakia. I was living in Germany at the time, the Cold War, Brezhnev. I remember the death of Kennedy as well, and the assassination of President Kennedy. I remember the first man landing on the moon. So, all these things were part of my life. In the Cold War, I was a soldier through most of it. The main enemy was the Soviet Union. So, and to read things from that era, written by clever, very academic people, can be fascinating, because it was a part of the world that I lived in at that time, and you get a deeper understanding of what was going on. Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, Mikhail Gorbachev, Perestroika, Poland, all those things are fascinating. East Germany, West Germany, Jaruzelski and Lech Wałęsa. Fascinating things to read about now that I'm 64 and looking back to that period, which was part of my life. Great stuff to read.
About the RAF.
Who?
The Red Army faction, the German one, not the Japanese one.
Yeah, the Red Army faction, the Baader-Meinhof gang, and so on. They were small, ruthless criminal outfits that tried to give themselves a political agenda in order to justify their criminal activities, but they were murderers. They were murderers who thought that they could step outside of the political process and kill people to obtain their objectives. And you know, they deserved to go to prison. They deserved to be killed. And had they been in my sights any time during my military career, I'd have been happy to do the job for them.
How was your military training? Did you hear about the deep cut military training bases?
Yeah, that was a long time after I left the army. The British Army has followed the path of the German army, the Dutch army, the Belgian army, and it's become feminized, and it's become politically correct, and that may please an awful lot of politically motivated people, but I don't believe that it makes a good army. And so the world changes. It's not the same army that it was when I was young. The young people that are entering the British Army now are not prepared to be adults. In many cases, their parents keep them as children until they're 16 or 17 years old, and then send them out to try to become adults all of a sudden. Rather than teaching them to be responsible and training them to be adults, they train them to stay as children, a bit like puppies. And so the type of person that goes into the army can't cope with the stresses and strains of that process, and they get humiliated, they get isolated, and and terrible things happen. But that's because of the system and the process of selection, training, and so on. That nowadays they want soldiers to be nice people, and then they want to send those really, really nice people out to kill people, and that doesn't work. It doesn't work. If you want to make good soldiers, you have to make people who want to fight, and you don't make people want to fight by being nice to them. It's sad, but it's true. And if you want your country defended, you don't want your big brother to run away. You want your big brother to stand up for you and protect you, because you can't do it yourself.
But when you want to become a soldier, you want to fight. I reckon lots of young boys and girls, they become, they do martial arts, or they have that's teenager thing. No, you want to be the warrior, yeah. And then you go in with their, so
yeah. But then in many cases they're not prepared for that, because their parents have made them soft, they've made them irresponsible, they've made them incapable of dealing with responsibility, and then suddenly they're thrust into a military situation and they can't cope with it. And so they can't deal with distress because they've never been stressed. Nobody's ever made them. Everybody says, oh, it's not your fault. Oh, never mind, it'll be okay tomorrow. Oh, I'll help you with your homework. Oh, never mind, it wasn't your fault that you stole 2 sweets from the shop, and so on. And so consequently, parents are bringing children up and making excuses for them all the time, and then wonder why they can't be good adults later on. If you want people to be good soldiers, you have to select the tough ones from society, the ones that are going to thrive on adversity, the ones that are going to thrive on difficulty, and they're going to be able to fight. And I don't think they do that anymore.
So they have then still good drill sergeants that
no, I don't think they
try
do.
To be the enemy.
Well, no, I don't think they do. I think the whole process has fallen down. You could say the same thing about hospitals, where you had hospitals were built originally on a military structure, where the senior nurse was the most powerful woman in the whole hospital. She was more powerful than the most senior male consultant. She was the person in charge of everything that happened in the hospital. And today, it's all been equalized, and they make their decisions on computers, and they don't take responsibility anymore. And they've lost the ability to care for people. They just treat patients as people that come in, and they're a nuisance that they have to be put up with until they go out again in order to get paid. I don't think that. I think that a lot of the very, very positive structures from the past have been changed. They've been damaged, and it's almost impossible to get them back.
Can you give a compared example, just a practical one?
Well, if you talk about soldiering again, if you want boys to actually grow into confident and strong men, you have to physically challenge them with tough training. But there's a big difference between tough training and bullying. So if you stress people, you make life hard for them, you make it difficult. And if they cry, you don't show any sympathy. You teach them that, okay, have a cry, but you still need to get on and do this job. You know, you still need to turn up. You still need to get out of bed. I don't care if you've got a cold. There's a job to do. What do you think is going to happen when the enemy are coming over the hill and they're machine gunning you? And you want to sit in the bottom of a trench and cry? You know, it's no good. You've got to learn to be a man. What happens now is that if the sergeant shouts at them, they can pull a yellow card out of their pocket and give the sergeant a warning. That isn't a positive way of dealing with a problem. If the sergeant's a bully, that's a different story. But if it's just tough training, if it's just shouting at people and getting them to do a job, then that's very, very different. It's gone wrong, and nobody's prepared to put it right, and nobody will put it right until there's a war, a real war that lasts over a protracted period of time. And when that happens, things will get put right. A lot of good young men were immediately sent to Afghanistan, where the things got sorted out very quickly. But the training process back in the United Kingdom, very, very poor, because they're all trained to make excuses instead of being trained not to make excuses and to do a good job.
You failed your first SAS selection. What was that because of this? Because you didn't realize this, or what? Why?
No, it was I wasn't mentally and physically strong enough, and but I got close to the end of the first training period, so they kept me on for 4 months and let me do it again in the January 1979, and I was one of 8 people that passed. So I just wasn't really. I've got photographs of me on the first test and the photographs of me beginning the second test, and it looks like 2 different men. I look like a fairly chubby young 21-year-old paratrooper, and when 4 months later, I look like a supremely fit soldier ready to do the job, and I was.
And how did you do this? What did you do after your first attempt when they kicked you out?
Well, I had 4 months where I had to provide administrative support to soldiers who had passed, but the rest of the time I was free to go up the mountains and to practice and get into really good shape and work on my map reading, physical fitness. And so I would get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, go down to the local swimming pool and swim 1,000 meters. And then I'd have some breakfast, and then I'd do an 8-mile run and over the countryside with boots on. And then in the afternoon, if I had a Land Rover available, I'd go to the mountains and I'd give myself a route over the mountains. And I'd come back in the evening and enjoy my evening and do very, very similar things, and Monday to Friday. It was great, really good time.
Can you compare the situation, the conflict in Palestine to the conflict in Northern Ireland?
Yeah, in some ways. You've got 2 religiously divided groups who want to occupy and control the power structure. One is dominant, one isn't. And so the smaller group feel oppressed, and probably quite rightly so. And so because they're not getting anywhere politically, they then become violent, and a war starts. In Palestine, or if you want to call it Israel and Gaza, they don't have anybody standing in the middle to stop them killing each other. Whereas in Northern Ireland, the soldiers had to stand in the middle between the two groups and try to stop them from killing each other and get killed as a consequence.
How I mean, there's been Protestant terrorist group as well, no?
Yeah, absolutely.
And Irish one, but in the IDF, I mean, Israel trains soldiers for life, no?
Yeah. Well, they have conscription, so everybody at a certain age, usually 18, has to serve a year and be trained as a soldier.
3 years.
3 years, is it?
You have to go 3 years, and they every year you get called back for 1 month.
Yeah. So you're on reserve then, yeah.
Yeah, that means.
But that's that's part of their defence structure, and it works. I think it's a good idea. I think it should be introduced back into the United Kingdom. It's a shame they didn't. It's a shame they ever stopped it, because it's a very good thing for especially young men to do. It really is.
And women.
You mentioned there are Protestant terrorist groups. Yeah, absolutely. The UDA in Northern Ireland murdered quite a large number of Irish Catholics, but the IRA, the Catholic group, they actually murdered more of their own community than the Protestants did, because they took the young girls that had been out with soldiers in the early 70s, tied them to lampposts and tarred and feathered them. And they took the young men out that didn't cooperate with them and shot their kneecaps out in their own community. So they actually attacked their own daughters and sons in order to suppress and dominate their own community with their criminal organization. The UDA, not so much. And then, of course, they regarded the soldiers as representatives of the state. So they started to attack the soldiers and blow up pubs in the United Kingdom and blow up our wives and children on buses and blow up people in Germany who were British soldiers serving there as well. You know, they're evil. I can't remember which, Mönchengladbach, I think it was, but it's back in the 1980s. They murdered several British soldiers and their families in Germany. So, you know, it's evil people do evil things if you allow them to. And when you cooperate with terrorists, when you try to do deals with terrorists, when you appease terrorists, you just kick the can down the road, as the Americans would say. And when they've taken all your money, and when they've taken all your dignity and undermined all your institutions, and that's all over, they will still kill you, because that's what they're like. They're evil incarnate, and they shouldn't be dealt with at any level. They should be completely removed from any kind of negotiation until they stop murdering people. What they do is they use murder as a political weapon.
It's really sad, because I did live a long time in Ireland, and there's so hard feelings over centuries, and it's actually so ridiculous. I mean, you could just stop. No, I don't know. There's, if your family is involved or something, but I don't believe it's about religion, you know.
Well, there's a famous British general called Viscount Montgomery, and he said that the Irish are the greatest fighters in the world, and when they're not fighting somebody else, they're always fighting one another. And they do. I mean, you don't see the Germans still hating the Russians because of what happened in 1945. You don't see that. It's gone. It's the history. Everyone understands it's the history, and they're getting on with life. But the Irish, they love to go back 500 years to Oliver Cromwell, even further than that sometimes. And they love to identify themselves with one party or another and blame everybody from the past for their own failings today. It's convenient, especially for young men who aren't achieving anything in life. It's convenient to blame somebody else rather than to say, I'm just useless because I didn't go to school, because I didn't take responsibility, because I didn't do anything with my life. And now, because I'm a complete failure, I'm going to blame the other side. I'm going to blame the Protestants. I'm going to blame the Catholics. I'm going to blame Oliver Cromwell. You know, I'm going to blame Elizabeth I. You know, it's insanity. It doesn't make any sense to me as an Englishman. My cousins are Polish Catholics. I grew up with them. I used to wait outside while they went to confession and mass, and then go and play with them afterwards. It meant absolutely nothing to me. So this ingrained hatred that exists in the community in Ireland is of their own making, and it's almost as if they like it that way. They like to have someone to hate. They like to have someone to hate.
But is it then the government or the education or the suppression of the English? I mean, they have been suppressed for a long time.
But they're not suppressed now, are they? I mean, the German people were suppressed by the Nazis, but they're not suppressed now, are they? So what do? Drag all the old Nazis out that, you know, happened to be in the army at that time and start to hate them all over again? Do you? Of course you don't. You know, and it's the same thing. It's just a ridiculous way to behave to educated people. It's ridiculous.
And they've had lots of homeless and veterans as well, and they still have a homeless veteran crisis in Ireland.
Homeless veterans?
Yeah.
Well, I don't think it's specifically to veterans. I think the British, the United Kingdom, has a huge issue with homelessness across the whole of the community, the whole of the population, because they stopped building state-owned houses and renting them to the poorest people in society. They turned the whole thing into a commercial project to sell off the housing stock that belonged to the state and not replace it. So now there isn't enough housing for poor people who can afford the rents. And consequently, people end up on the streets. There's no hostels, there's no refuges, there's no shelter. And that's an absolute disgrace in a country that is the 7th biggest economy in the world, and it can't house its own people. It's absolutely disgraceful. They can fight a war, they can build aircraft carriers, they can build jets at 30 billion times, 30 billion pounds, but they can't build enough shelter for their own people. And that's disgraceful and disgusting, and it shouldn't be happening. It shouldn't be. It's not just military veterans that are in that place. It's lots of people from all walks of society in that place.
You also did work in Africa? No, you got sent
Africa, yeah, in Mozambique. I'm just going to shed some light on it. It's getting dark. I had to turn it down, but because the sun was shining through my window. But now it's getting dark outside, so I'm just going to put some light on if you don't mind. There we go. You can see me again now.
When was this?
Mozambique. That was 1980. When was it? 1989, I think. 1989. The Russians had just pulled out of Mozambique, supporting the ANC. The South Africans had pulled out of Mozambique and made peace. And the French were trying to build a railway from the south to the north. Renamo, which was a former South African bandit organization that operated in Mozambique, was still marauding across the country, murdering and killing people and destroying the infrastructure. So I went down there to serve as an officer in the army of Frelimo, which was the Mozambican government, to defeat those insurgents.
Did you did fight with German soldiers against German soldiers?
Where?
In Mozambique, because the conflict was there was East German.
No, the Russians and East Germans had left Mozambique, And so they'd gone, they left most of their equipment behind, their helicopters, their weapons, and so on, and a military structure, which was called Frelimo. The South Africans had pulled out of Mozambique. The war had ended between South Africa and the ANC, the African National Congress. And so having taken away the Soviet bloc leadership, the Frelimo army was left with some big problems. And so we were taken down to become officers, training officers, and eventually fighting officers with their army, which I did for about 15, 16 months. And it was a good one. I was on the right side, and I thought they had huge possibilities for the future. You know, it was a communist government, but you know, everything isn't evil about communism.
So what's going on now there?
Well, they've got this Boko Haram group that are essentially criminals that are using religion as an excuse to be marauding bandits and kill people and steal their property and steal their women. It's that simple. There's nothing really about what they do that has anything at all to do with religion. It's just an excuse to be a criminal.
Did you ever go back?
No, but it was a beautiful place, and you know, I would, in many ways, although when I was there was a war on and there was starvation. People were absolutely incredible and beautiful, and they understood the important things in life.
What's
like
the important
food,
things in life then?
food and shelter and security and family and sharing and generosity and love. And they really, and because of the terrible hardships that they'd been through, they understood what was really and truly important, because life could be finished in a moment, just like that, and often was. And so they were wonderful people.
Did you
I
make
cried when I
friends
left
with
them.
them? Did you?
Oh God, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was an officer in their army. I mean, I just thought that I just thought that they were incredible people. I cried when I came home, because they all came to the airport, hundreds of them, to say goodbye and sang, and I was in tears. It was beautiful, absolutely beautiful people.
After leaving the army, how do you deal with your memories? I guess
You just get on with life. Too many things to worry about. Bringing up children, paying for a mortgage, going on holidays with your family, getting another job, building a business, all sorts of things. You just, you know, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about the past, except on somebody's birthday or an anniversary. You know, Remembrance Day is for remembering the dead soldiers. The rest of the 364 days of the year are for enjoying life and getting on with it. You know, there are an awful lot of people who make themselves miserable by constantly picking a scab and wanting to repeat bad memories. Well, that's just like punching yourself in the face. You know, why would you do that? You know, it's happened, it's done. Now get on with life. Find something new to do.
so. You just ignore it and go forward.
I don't ignore it. I just accept that it's part of my past. I learned many things from it, and if people are interested, sometimes I talk about it. But you know, the mistakes I made, I try not to make twice. But there's as you get older as well, you tend to remember the best parts of history, of your history, rather than the worst, because I think people who get depressed spend too much time thinking about the bad things that have happened in their life instead of the good things. No, I don't know anything about that.
Okay. And do you know about, have you been in Berlin to the Teufelsberg?
I've been, last time I was in Berlin was to be a referee in a karate championship about 30 years ago. No, about 20 years ago. About 20 years ago. And I had a very enjoyable time. There were some very good people. But that was the last time I was in Berlin.
Who was the champ then, the Berlin champ?
Oh, I don't know. It was an international competition between Australia, UK, Germany, and some other countries I don't recall. But I don't remember who was the champion. I mean, karate organizations have different champions every year in different categories and different styles, and they all claim that they're world champions. That must mean probably thousands of world champions. But it's just competition is just a small branch off the tree of martial arts. If you go and sit on the end of that branch, eventually you'll fall off. You have to go back to the main trunk and climb to become a proper martial artist. You know, the first time I went to Berlin, the wall had come down, and I walked through the Brandenburg Gate, and I went from east to west and landed at Tempelhof. You know, so but during my military service, my battalion went to Berlin, but I got left behind with a different unit. But my battalion went to Berlin for 2 years, and they were still looking after guarding Spandau Prison and looking after Rudolf Hess, and that would have been 1977, 1978, yeah. But I didn't go with them.
What was your job in Germany?
I didn't go with them. I wasn't there. Yeah, I went to Wiederhausen with the Deutsches Fallschirmjäger, and I did a parachute course with them down there. And I've been down to Special Forces School at Pfullendorf and did a lecture for them. And that was a lot of fun because, you know, you had German forces, American forces, British forces. That was great. I like Germany. I like it down in the south. Bavaria is a beautiful place. I love the mountains. Yeah, so yeah, a lot of good things. But I lived in Germany when I was a boy for 3 years in Dortmund and Duisburg. And so ich habe in Deutschland gewohnt, wenn ich ein Kind war. You know, so I have some great memories of being a child living in Germany in 1966, the last time England won the World Cup. So yeah, it's a great country, great people. And that was when every adult said good morning to you when you walk down the street.
Okay. And what was the lecture about?
It was about my life story, about my military missions, about my experiences since then as a bodyguard and a mercenary, but also about some issues with post-traumatic stress and how to cope with it, and you know, lots of things. A question and answer. So I'll do a lecture, and then we'll usually allow an hour for question and answers, which becomes the better part of the evening.
It's just you know that I interview army psychiatrists from every year from every country. Mm-hmm. I did interview Mr. John Halker. Yeah, he's a contractor for the UK, for the Royal, because the Royal Army doesn't spend so much money on their own staff. They contract people, or yeah.
So they've what do they call it? They've given an awful lot of the military work to civilian companies.
Yeah.
And consequently, that means that the army can't transport its own tanks because it needs civilian drivers to drive the lorries. It can't cook its own food because it needs civilian cooks to cook the food, and so on. When the British Army went to Afghanistan, they were called the borrowers by the Americans because they were always borrowing the American gear in order to be able to do their job properly. It's a badly equipped, very small army now. It's 1/3 of the size it was when I joined it. When I joined the British Army in 1972, the army alone had 155,000 men in it, men and women. Now it's down to 55,000. and that's a hollow force. The 55,000 men isn't enough men in a conventional war to protect one city, let alone one country.
So what do you tell people then if you didn't have post-trauma or did study psychology about post-traumatic stress disorder?
Well, I'm not a psychologist, so I can only talk about my own experience and how I dealt with it and what the symptoms were. And I don't want to get into that subject because we only have about 5 minutes left. I've got another appointment. But the way I dealt with it was to discover I had counseling and was to realize that you can't change the world. You can only change yourself. And so you have to decide to change yourself and your own behavior in order to deal with your problems and stop blaming the world, because the world won't change.
Okay, thank you. Did you check out the interviews I made with?
I didn't, but I will do that. I've been trying to make arrangements to move back to England, and I've been having huge problems with the contract for a house I want. And it's been very, very, very difficult and stressful, which is why I was late tonight. And I finally got it resolved at 6 o'clock tonight, my time. And what a relief. What an absolute relief. And all the lessons that I've been teaching recently about stress, I had to teach myself over the last week of don't get angry, don't get emotional, stay in the fight, be reasonable, and all those things. And I gradually worked my way through it and got a successful conclusion tonight. So, so we moved back to England on August the 6th, yeah, into a place in a lovely house in South Wales.
For the love, or you're moving back for the love of UK?
Yeah, well, not for the love of the UK as much as the love of my family. I've got a new great-granddaughter arriving in August. I've got 3 great-grandsons already, which I haven't seen very much of. And I've got 10 grandchildren, and I've got 3 daughters and 2 sons. And I've been away for 4 years, and I haven't seen any of them since the COVID crisis. And I miss them too much, and I'm getting old, and I want to spend more time with them now and see them and watch them grow and enjoy their lives as well.
Yeah, check out the interviews. Every country says something else. Every army psychologist.
I'm sure they do. I'm sure they do. Opinions, you know, everybody's got one.
And stay aggressive, everybody. And
I'm just gonna have a little plug here. That's my latest book, Warrior Poet, and that's my life story if anybody wants it, Fighting Scared. And I'm sure there are going to be links on the page anyway.